光と闇、せめぎ合う二つの力が衝突する。面白くなってきた。
Anyone who's played more than just a Kingdom Hearts game would disagree with you on that. We returned to the series on a nice landscape shot before it all went south. Oh god, it's one of the engineers from Prometheus. You know, I probably should have used this joke back when Ukubo was around. Oh well. Actually, it turned out to be one of those dark lights that were haphazardly edited in as a sequel hook at the end of the last episode. This was further elaborated on by the Queen of Light, and then later relayed to our heroines by their fairy partners. And I didn't feel like bringing this up because the writers were still working it out and are even now. But yeah, Jarky had essentially pulled a King Piccolo and right before his death created some last minute offspring known as the Dark Seeds to steal energy from the human world to revive him and in turn the Dotsuku Zone. An interesting enough premise and reason to keep this series going, which I remind you is called wait, what is this show called?
Precure desu ja.
Well, to be fair, Cura is a higher level healing spell than just plain old cure, so he does have the right idea at least. Anyway, Queenie had sent Mepple and Mipple to reunite with their partners, along with Pollun, as he was the OG Godbaby of this franchise. Well, I'm sure this will only lead to good things and not a divisive character like any of his brethren. Seriously, does this show really need any more obnoxious mascots? Dude, just go back to either playing a Spider-Man or serving the Spider King, because that's really all you're good for. To be fair, Pollun wasn't too bad in this first episode focused on him, as all he really did was jump around a little, and at first his ability to sense the Dark Seeds was intriguing. Said first seed was already on the move. My god, an efficient worker! That is pretty commonplace in the very strict working environment of Japan. Yeah, this is just kind of a weird and kind of underwhelming way of introducing a new villain, as it fails to get across any intrigue or threat. I mean, yeah, as we'll soon see, there is an interesting concept behind these characters, and why they're living such mundane lives at first, but this still feels like a bit of a waste of runtime, especially in hindsight. Honestly, I'm more fascinated by Mrs. Bootsby bonking her head on the lamp here. It's one of those little animation details that they really didn't need to include, and yet they did, and I appreciate it. It makes the scene feel a little more realistic and gives personality. Anyway, Pollun ran off for no particular reason other than that the plot demanded it, and the Precure had to track down the little plushie. At the same time, a typhoon was approaching that seemed to catch the attention of that office worker from the previous scene named Kakuzawa. For him, it seemed to trigger some old memories. Well, I guess that's one way to quit your job. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I was legit kind of shaken by this scene. Oh, not so much for the dude seemingly committing Sudoku only to turn into a spandex-clad bodybuilder out of nowhere. That's just standard anime stuff. No, the freaky part was how the scene seemed to repeat itself, only now Kakuzawa had been completely erased from existence as his co-workers didn't remember him and he disappeared from their photos. I'm not gonna lie, this is an interesting setup for the Dark Seeds, as they're basically like sleeper agents who eventually wake up and subsequently erase any evidence of their existence. Will they utilize this unique setup in interesting ways? Well, we'll see. Anyway, Juna here seemed to end up calling forth the typhoon straight to the city. Well, okay. With something like this, is like the town gonna suffer from severe damage, or are we like gonna get some kind of really intense and awesome battle with the Precure in the middle of the storm? Nope, he just absorbed the storm to bulk up a little.
Well, that was pointless.
I mean, yeah, natural disasters are going to be a theme with these baddies, but unless they do something interesting with here, then it kind of feels superfluous. Anyway, he had noticed Pollun and chased him into a parking garage. Fortunately, Nagisa and Honoka found them just as the dude started to go through withdrawals.
Don't do drugs, kids.
This resulted in a not-so-good fight. I mean, I'll give them points for the unique setting of the parking garage that made it feel like something right out of Yakuza, but you could also tell that they had wasted the animation budget on stuff like that typhoon, leaving the Precure to fight like they were underwater in some parts here. Anyway, to at least establish that he was a threat, Juna managed to successfully tank the mighty marble screw, establishing that some greater threats were on the horizon for our heroines. This would continue into the next episode where... No, sorry, I think I might have put in my copy of Grave of the Fireflies in by mistake. But yeah, just from that cold opener, you could tell things were going to get a little heavy in this one. The episode proper focused on the Precure trying to wrap up their summer homework, which proved difficult between the humid weather and these high-pitched little nightmares. Okay, fine, just as long as this guy could be the ref. Yeah, as if the Sim Fairy wasn't bad enough, the Godbaby actually amplified the annoyance. Yeah, for the sake of your sanity and mine, let's just cut over to the actually interesting part of this episode, as a mysterious lady was walking around town. And at first, I thought she had actually killed off a couple of bystanders here, but I think they were actually mannequins that she had given life to. Still, really clever and kind of trippy direction for fooling me like that. But yeah, she had used them to create some bodyguard Zakenna. These actions ended up setting off Pollun's sixth sense, which at this point is starting to feel more like this. Also, gotta give credit to Nagisa for calling out BS on these fairies and their verbal tics that make playing games with them kinda pointless. And yet, while she was cynical at first, the fact that they had to continue to fight against stronger and stronger enemies started to weigh in on her. Now, this is the kind of stuff I love to see in my superhero shows. For many of them, they have to face the reality that the fight has no real end. Even though they defeated one final boss, doesn't mean another great evil isn't going to literally sprout up and take their place. This is especially stressful for these two, as they only barely defeated Jarky with the backing of a bit of a Deus Ex Machina. This is really good drama that I love to see, and hopefully they don't ruin it by the end. They are, aren't they? Thankfully, they did get a bit of a pep talk from Sanai when she started to recount how she got over some of her more difficult experiences. My god, you flunked a test? Okay, but seriously, what she had to talk about was pretty intense, as the whole city disappearing thing had nothing to do with like the magic they're dealing with right now, unless you count the creation of tactical bombardments as such. She specifically brought up the fire bombings of Tokyo in March of 1945, which of course were then followed up by Hiroshima and Nagasaki just a few months later in August, ending World War II. In the aftermath of all of that, Sanai essentially became a gender-bent barefoot gen, leading a group of surviving children over a hill while singing that song that she had learned from the guy in the cold opener, likely her father. She had fully believed in his words that something better always waited on the next horizon, but really, neither had truly seen the ravages of war until that point. Not to mention, considering that he was dressed like a soldier, and we never see him beyond that initial flashback, yeah, we can kind of guess what happened to him. With all that in mind, feeling absolute despair seemed like the only logical choice in such a moment, and yet the hopeful words Sanai could hear from a still dormant Mipple kept her going even through the most difficult times for her country. Jeez, well, go to commercial. Anyway, after a phrase that would pretty much describe the entirety of the Danganronpa franchise, our heroines got some shave ice from Akane, who was feeling especially topical that day. And after all of these talks about wars and depressions, I guess it was only appropriate that they soon run into the next dark seed. And like how Juna was powered by typhoons, this E-girl had the power of volcanoes by her side, which was something she needed after seeing the Precure triggered her awakening, which did come off very dramatic and threatening and you ruined it. Yeah, from here, things just kind of got goofy, as after Juna delivered a hell of a spear out of nowhere to drag his cohort to a volcanic eruption to finish her awakening, Nagisa then kind of ruined Sanae's story by revealing that most of her stress was actually coming from the fact that their Precure Dewies were eating into her snack time. I mean, I won't say it ruined the episode overall, as it's still really damn good, as it explored themes of keeping hope in the face of seemingly endless despair, even bringing up some very heavy subject matter from the country's past. It's just that it became tonally very confused at the tail end when it really didn't need to. Regine's awakening here would have held a lot more impact if they did include that cartoon sound effect, and the message of overcoming despair would have landed better if they didn't reveal Nagisa was just depressed over the fact that she didn't get her parfait. Still, a really good, well-animated episode directed by our old buddy Daisuke Nishio, easily one of my favorites of the season so far. With that, we entered into the last of the Dark Seed introductions, with this one in particular seemingly having power over his cohort. Wow, so this dude must be a big deal, right? Like, he has to be a big buff dude like Ukubo, or just a tiny, frail-looking old man. Like, come on, this guy has to be a little bit more threatening than that. I mean, what does he even sound like? Moebius, you're a few seasons early. He also seemed to have even stronger mind manipulation than the other two, but come on, would you expect anything less from the OG voice of M. Bison? Anyway, this is also a summer festival episode, with our heroines heading out to one with their fairy friends, Sans the Green One, thank God. I mean, yeah, Pollun would end up following them, but he really wouldn't add anything to this episode, as even his forecasting of the Dark Seed would end up becoming irrelevant to our heroines by the time he got to them. And honestly, I think that's my biggest problem with this character. He just doesn't add much that the other two don't already. I mean, I think I've made it clear that I am no fan of Mepple, but I can at least admit that they have taken the time to make him an integral part of the show. Meanwhile, this character has been the definition of the tag-along kid. I mean, yeah, I know what's going to happen in the next episode, but even then, I don't think he was totally necessary. Anyway, the episode mostly focused on some more shipping between Nagisa and Fuji P, when the girls and boys end up meeting for a test of courage. It was probably just Yojamajo doing their once per season episode for this trope. Things quickly went south when the weather took a turn. Fujipi would end up rather graphically twisting his ankle when trying to save Nagisa after she slipped on some steps. Seriously, I won't even show it just in case anyone's squeamish to this sort of stuff. Of course, Nagisa was worried about injuring the foot of a soccer player, so they resorted to hitchhiking to the hospital, and fortunately, they met with a director of one who was also likely on his way to activate Skynet. Still, to this guy Belze's credit, he did actually drive them to a hospital, and even had someone immediately look at Fujipi. However, this is likely a cover-up for his real goal of getting to a building with an open roof, because as it turned out, his element was lightning. Okay, this guy literally is just M. Bison at this point, isn't he? Well, either that or Wolverine, especially with that height. Seriously, did anyone else realize that Wolverine is actually pretty short? Anyway, he created a Zakena out of some hospital equipment, resulting in a short, but good fight thanks to some solid animation and creative usage of these cables. They were defeated using some bull and matador tactics, but this turned out to be mostly a distraction to let him escape. This would lead to, actually, the most interesting part of the episode, as he released his mind control on the hospital staff, even passing by the real director. Again, stuff like this is legit kinda freaky with how quickly these guys can worm their way into people's minds, even when there is evidence that directly contradicts such. With that, the episode ended with Fujipi already on the road to recovery, but the new baddies had formed, and for whatever reason, got themselves a parrot. Personally, I'm more partial to parakeets. Our heroines tried to consult Wisdom about how to deal with their new adversaries, but he had nothing. Though maybe he just didn't want to have to deal with the little brat who was treating the show's MacGuffins like toys, which they technically are, but not in the show's meta at least. We also got some follow-up to Nagisa's homework arc, with her having not done anything, but believed that she would be able to pull off a college freshman move and get it all done with one all-nighter. This led to predictable results. Hey, anyone got an extra Red Bull on hand? To make matters worse, she had unknowingly brought an extra burden with her. Thus, once they got to school and Nagisa voluntarily offered to stand in the hall for her incomplete homework, Honoka was forced to join her when Pollun acted up under the lie that she too forgot her homework. Well, there goes your perfect GPA, girl.
ほのかまで宿題忘れたことになっちゃったじゃない。
Well, I can already tell I'm not gonna like this episode. Seriously, it just becomes eye-rolling from this point, as after the little brat escaped again, he, for no real reason, drew on a picture of the principal, which the Precure were blamed for, and thankfully weren't suspended or expelled for, because that's a pretty grave offense, and instead were just forced to pull weeds. Granted, Nagisa probably could have used some time away from school and in her bed.
二人でやるの。でもって早く終わらせるの。
Yeah, might want to lace that Red Bull with some Coke. And I mean like cola, not the other thing. Oh please, could something at least pretty cool happen right about now?
おっと今日も素敵な髪型で Thank you!
And it didn't take long before their influence overtook the entire school, knocking out everyone sans our heroines. We also got a new eye catch and version of the ending sequence starting from this episode. The former was very charming with chibi representations of our characters, while the latter featured the seeds doing the Russian squat dance. That's a thing. Well, thankfully, they at least remained threatening in the show proper, being able to even instantly find Wisdom's pocket dimension and dragged him out. From there, they fought the Precure in a good example of a curb stomp battle, as they completely overpowered them and even neutralized their finisher. Thus, it was pretty obvious our heroines needed to find a significant upgrade. And they get one just after Wish tried to escape. Admit it, you're kind of envious of this little dude, aren't ya? But yeah, he managed to evade them thanks to some teleport spamming, but his stamina eventually started to give out. Thus, he at least needed to hide the power of the Prism Stones, and the only thing he could put the powers of creation in was... Papa? Yeah, are we sure we don't want to just hand that over to Jarky? I mean, what's the worst that could happen? A few earlier nights here and there? So yeah, in order to make this new character, and more importantly, his associated toy, at least somewhat relevant to the show, they just made the Big MacGuffin a part of him. And again, I don't think the biggest problem with this character has been the subjective matter of how he hasn't been exactly the most endearing character, though that certainly doesn't help matters, but I think it's more the fact that he hasn't been extremely plot relevant, to the point that if he hadn't been in the show at all, it wouldn't have made that much of a difference, as even his precognitions lacked any relevance. Thus, it just feels kind of forced to fully upgrade him to the status of Godbaby by pure happenstance. At least with other examples, it was initially established that they were important, or at least well foreshadowed. Anyway, the seeds captured Wisdom and would have finished the Precure off, but they were saved by Pollun throwing another tantrum and their new toys. These rainbow bracelets gave them significant stat buffs and removed debuffs, including Nagisa's sleepiness that was self-inflicted. And of course, they also included a new finisher. You and Tsubasa would have a great time discussing your franchise's meta. But yeah, all in all, this was at least a good debut for the new toys thanks to some good animation and the power creeps that our heroines had to overcome after their initial defeat at the hands of the seeds. However, the figurative black clouds above our heroines weren't going anywhere soon, as Wisdom and the stones had been taken. In the following episode, the seeds quickly realized that the 7 stones had become like those 7 other MacGuffins right after a wish had been granted, and they were powerless.
Isn't it obvious?
Like, even if you assume most fairies have some sort of special power, you saw firsthand how much of a significant power-up the Precure got from Pollun. Plus, there's that little detail that he was the last one to interact with wisdom and the stones before you captured them. It's just kind of basic logic is all I'm saying. Hell, even our heroines for some reason couldn't put two and two together until the Elder spelled it out for them. Then again, maybe they were just distracted by how overly energetic this little brat was thanks to the buff from the stones. But okay, maybe I'm being a little too mean. After all, now that he does have an actually important role in the show, maybe he'll be more than just like a convenient little power-up Deus Ex Machina. And maybe Toy doesn't rely on nostalgia baiting. But yeah, as I said, the Elder contacted the Precure through Pollun, and they exchanged intel, including how Pollun had the power of the Prism Stones in him. Now, I'm glad that they didn't keep our protagonist in the dark forever, but then the Elder just had to tell the kid that everyone in the Garden of Light missed him, resulting in Pollun trying to find a way back there that didn't exist. At some point, Darwinism really needs to kick in for the show. This resulted in, I guess, what was supposed to be a chase sequence with the Precure hitching a ride with Akane. Honestly, the direction and storyboarding here just wasn't all that strong due to the over-reliance of quick cuts and our heroines just sliding across the frame. Not too surprisingly, this was the work of our old buddy Yasuo Yamayoshi, who thankfully doesn't seem to be getting much work these days. Anyway, they managed to rescue the plushie, and of course, he gave them another premonition that was both too vague and came too late to matter, as Juna had already led them into an obvious trap. The resulting fight was not great. Again, Yamayoshi's direction was pretty uninspired, not helped by an uninspired setup. You do realize that these girls can kind of jump really well? I mean, that's like one of the first things they do in their debuts after all. Sure, he tried to ground them using some iron poles, but frankly, I've seen them better used in an underrated superhero movie. Seriously, at least that Final Battle kicked ass. Still, to his credit, Pollun did at least try to help beyond just his Godbaby powers before activating them again, and yet the seeds still wouldn't be able to put two and two together about where the powers were. Jeez, y'all make Shredder look competent by comparison.
I wanna conquer Earth!
Anyway, the episode at least ended on a pretty cool development, with them beginning the revival of Jarkey and his T-pose of domination. Unfortunately, the next episode was a bit more of the same, as while he did at least try to hide his existence this time, Pollun remained the same spoiled brat who wanted others to play with him, especially after seeing Nagisa do some wrestling with her little brother. Well, there was kind of AJ Lee, though her tiny body could barely do it, really. Anyway, when he couldn't find anyone to play with him, he tried to force the assistant cards to play tag with him, even though they really should be used to provide emergency support for the fairy partners, considering they're kind of in a life and death war with Eldritch Abomination. But sure, they could spare their time and energy to satiate this whiny little brat whose whole arc so far has been the exact same pattern for multiple episodes now. Pollun gets homesick, he tries to run off, and the Precure have to protect him whilst quelling his selfish needs. Yeah, you can really tell that the writers were spinning their wheels at this point, and understandable, as they had been given a sudden season extension that we've mentioned previously. And as a result, while I'm not necessarily against the concept of Pollun as a character, it just kind of falls apart in the execution when his arc becomes this repetitive. Anyway, Nagisa tried to consult with Honoka over what they should do with the little brat, especially after he interrupted her breakfast.
You went full retard, man. Never go full retard.
Then they at least tried to do something different and productive by actually asking for Pollun's premonitions ahead of time, in this case where they could find wisdom and the hoppish. He hinted at the parrot of the dark seeds. And on that note, the baddies were going through their same routine of pointlessly asking where the power of the stones went, even though the answer is right under their noses. Still, they did change it up a little bit by deploying Regine, who, yeah, what's her gimmick again? Being freshly defrosted Austin Powers?
Yes, I'm having difficulty controlling the volume of my voice!
Credit where it's due, these guys and their pet were the best part of this episode. Back with our heroines, they tried to take Pollun's mind off of his homeworld that they couldn't go to without the hoppish.
お祭りはもう終わっちゃったよ。
Well, you could talk to this guy. He might be able to hook you up. They took him to the temple grounds from the previous episode, unknowingly passing Regine in the process. And I have to admit, I kind of like how she has a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde gimmick going, with her human form being mostly calm and reserved, aside from the occasional bitch scream. Anyway, even though there was no traditional festival, there was a place that could act as a suitable substitute at a price. Seriously, I hope these girls have seasonal passes, as they really shouldn't have to spend anything just to satisfy this plushie. And yes, this also just so happened to be the same amusement park from the first episode.
今日もなんてやめてよもう。ごめんごめん、忘れよ。
Nagisa, you're at a toy show. Anything you can and will say will be used as a flag. Sure enough, deja freaking vu happened, and after creating an evil Dinobot, Regine engaged our heroines. And even though the animation wasn't the best here, just the fact the magical girls were fighting a fire-breathing demon dinosaur made this metal as all hell. Unfortunately, it was cut short when Pollun did his thing after they forced a message about friendship and all that. I mean, the message itself wasn't bad or anything, but it was delivered in like the last few minutes of the episode, after the fairy had been nothing but an ungrateful little brat throughout. Again, this character is really dragging down this part of the series, as they were just stuck in an incredibly repetitive pattern. 33 at least kind of changed things up by shifting focus onto Nagisa's lacrosse teammates Shiho and Rina. Yeah, remember these two? Well, anyway, while the animation here wasn't the best, don't worry, we'll get better later, we did at least get a very nicely directed flashback to make us aware of the big conflict of this episode involving the redhead.
先週の試合のこと引きずってる？特に忘れた。
I don't have PTSD, you have PTSD! But yeah, even though we haven't really got to know these two, and we are kind of being dropped into the middle of their story, this is still some pretty interesting drama, as an offhanded comment from Rina ended up creating some tension between the two, as they were one loss away from being booted from a tournament. Yet, surprisingly, all of this was a little less awkward than what was going on with the King of Darkness. Okay, Jarky, I really think you need to start considering changing up your diet if you're gonna have this much constipation. But yeah, Rina genuinely wasn't trying to antagonize her friend, and even recognized that she was trying her hardest to improve and avoid any more mistakes that could cost them a game. Not that Shiho was getting those vibes, especially with the rumor network being a thing.
結構きつかったよね。リーグ戦の成績心配よね。
Insert obvious Twitter joke here. As a result, things only got worse between the two.
そんなに自信がないの？もうやめちゃえば？そうする。
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Yeah, this is some good school drama that this show has kind of been missing from its second half so far. Granted, it did share a lot of similarities with our protagonist's previous falling out, which they did acknowledge, and you know, I really like this idea of them showing how much these two have grown through their own turbulence, and we're now sharing their experiences with these two. It was certainly a lot more engaging than dealing with this character and his rather forced inclusion into the plot. Anyway, Nagisa especially had a great exchange with Shiho that I probably couldn't do justice, and just suggest you go see it for yourself. Anyway, game day soon arrived, and there was a noticeably taller and much older looking player on the opposing team.
私と写真撮ってください。え？まあいいですけど。
By the way, I love your Juji Ito cosplay. Though seriously, again, I really like this mechanic of these characters seemingly having perfect hypnosis that even seems to affect our heroines into believing that the seeds blend in anywhere in spite of some very obvious inconsistencies. Also, remember when we mentioned that they were saving up the better animation for later? Well, it's later. I don't think we've mentioned him yet, but Tatsuo Yamada has been a great key animator for the series, as his stuff is just ridiculously smooth and full of life. It helps that he doesn't seem to mind weird proportions and exaggerated movements, as I'm pretty sure Regine broke her spine here, but whatever, it's very stylized and just looks cool. He also did the animation for the Rainbow Bracelet summonings that unfortunately cut off this great fight they were having, as apparently Pollun could even sense his friends being in danger from miles away. Because why even build up tension, as they even had a gripping ticking clock mechanic with Nagisa running late to the game because of this fight, where they also just arbitrarily threw Juna into the mix. Though well, at least the main conflict between Shiho and Rina was resolved very nicely, with the two being able to cover for each other, and the former making the game-winning shot. Rolling right into 34, Nagisa provided the usual recaps that we really haven't touched on, as they haven't been that important, but this one featured a curious bit of monologuing from her.
How did you know about the parts you weren't there for?
But yeah, while we were done with these two for now, it did seem like we were going to get some more school drama, with a relay race where Nagisa was going to be the anchor versus Yuka, who acknowledged her as her rival in it. Granted, it would be nice if they could get the Deuterogonus of the show to participate, and we could get a good character building episode out of it, but hey, as long as we're not doing the same old with the show. And as if that wasn't bad enough, this was also going to be another Finding the Lost Pollun episode. Okay, kid, you get 1 point for that cock block. Not that it exactly makes up for all of your art demerits. There was also a subplot involving this dude who will become more important in the next episode. For now though, as mentioned, they had to find the runaway plushie and in the process ran into Regine again. Yeah, honestly, they probably could have cut out most of this character's scenes and just go right into the Precure encountering the baddie in the music room. It would also free up time to properly develop the rivalry between Yuka and Nagisa that ended up becoming a bit of an afterthought in spite of them building this up like it was going to be the main conflict of the episode. Anyway, take a guess as to what sort of Zetsuborg she made. Mario 64 still did better. Seriously, the piano key teeth are kind of creative, but without even a top row or even sharp teeth, it's more cute than actually intimidating. Thus, kind of appropriately, it led to an underwhelming and poorly animated fight in which our heroines did pretty much nothing, and were again just bailed out by Pollun, who only sensed that they were in danger and sent them their bracelets. Because who needs creativity when you just have stock animations? Anyway, the episode ended with Nagisa arriving late to the relay race and defeating Yuka, even though I question the validity of a literal late runner, but whatever, this episode was a wash. The following episode tackled something that's surprisingly uncommon in this franchise, in spite of how much of a big deal social media makes out of it, the birth date of our heroines, specifically Nagisa here. The anniversary of her creation was just a few days away, so her friends asked what kind of present she wanted. You want some rock concert tickets? Because I do know of a few girls who can hook you up. Nah, of course, she wanted Senpai to notice her, but she'd end up getting the great value version of him instead. Yeah, as mentioned, this was the guy from the last episode named Hasekura. Over the course of that story, he had developed a crush on Nagisa and decided to just go straight into it. A schmaltzy love story with some kind of needless comedy. I'm just gonna guess Yoshimi Narita? Yeah, I'm good at this. And of course, like a lot of her writing, the heroine only had an eye for her assigned love interest, so she wanted to turn him down, which Honoka even encouraged, which was probably for her own gains, if you know what I mean. However, because the love interests in Narita's stories also have to be kind of thick-headed, Hasekura rather forcibly asked this girl, who he only just met and hadn't even really started a proper relationship with, out into the countryside to pick chestnuts of all things. Like, you could at least ask if she's busy or not, rather than just skip it to, "Hey, Misumi-san, do you like chestnuts?" "Well, I guess I mean, great, see you tomorrow." "Wait, I meant I liked them as Christmas decorations. I'm actually kind of allergic to them." "Hey, senpai, I told scored." Meanwhile, the Dark Seeds were just doing their usual circular monologuing. Anyway, the weekend soon arrived, and Nagisa was understandably hesitant to go. "Come with me and say that I'm gay!" I mean, come on, it's practically the truth anyway. Honoka at first refused, but soon followed the two when finally Pollun's premonitions actually affected the plot in some way, as they hinted at something ominous involving chestnuts. And sure enough, there was something truly despair-inducing there. Cheap-ass montages with stills. Yeah, needless to say, the animation quality of the second half of the series has taken a noticeable nosedive. Granted, there were still nice moments, like Honoka encouraging her friend to have the courage to turn this tool down. But honestly, this plot has been so underwhelming that we may as well just go right into the Monster of the Week fight and get it over with. And again, while the animation here wasn't great, it still did allow Narita to flex her real strength in writing slapstick comedy. Needs some more appropriate music. Oh, I know. Anyway, they defeated the baddie while a half-conscious Hasakura watched, which resulted in him falling for Cure Black and, well... Oh boy, Ultimate Precure is gonna have an overcomplicated love octagon, isn't it?
It's not you, it's me.
You're giving me the it's not you, it's me routine? I invented it's not you, it's me.
Well, at least we ended on a nice note with Fuji P giving Nagisa a proper birthday greeting and another good joke. Nagisa, you do know that Brock's donuts were just a meme, right? Fortunately, the next episode introduced some actually likable side characters in the form of the butler Zakena. A couple of far more sentient mooks who could not only talk, but actually had fun personalities, being the bumbling caretakers of the parrot and wisdom. I especially like the shorter one, and his rather clever design that included a clean bandana with the traditional anger marks of his race all over it. It was certainly better than his partners, who, yeah, with the shape of that head and that mark, he kind of looks like that one Gintama character. But yeah, thankfully, these two would carry over into the next series, as they were easily the most entertaining characters to be introduced in this latter half of the series. Anyway, at the same time, our heroines were trying to make collages, but were forced into yet another conflict between the fairies, with Mipple coddling the youngest one, and Mr. Nice Guy, Mepple, getting jealous. Mr. Pod, do you have something you want to say to Mr. Kettle? Again, my biggest complaint with this part of the series is not just that I find the mascots insufferable, but more just how repetitive these episodes have become. Many of them began and ended with Pollun crying for attention, and yet never really developing beyond it. You can only use the he's a kid excuse so much before it starts to eat away at your show's entertainment value, which should take priority over selling yet another toy. Is there anything else better we could skip to? Thank you. Wisdom actually lived up to his name and came up with a rather clever plan to escape by spilling the parrot's seeds and forcing the butlers to try and clean its cage. This of course gave him an opening to escape in a very entertaining sequence. Again, these two are easily the saving grace of this episode, as they're a classic example of entertainingly bumbling goons. Anyway, out of his cage and away from the Darkseid's signal-canceling barrier, Wisdom managed to make contact with the Precure.
I'll give you a cookie if you shut up.
He of course needed a rescue, but couldn't exactly tell where he was, as they were basically in the middle of nowhere. However, he did stumble upon a field of daffodils, which just so happened to be one of the articles the Precure were using for their collage. Because when the writers find themselves in a corner, they just need to use a random news report or paper that just so happens to be there to solve everything. Yeah, can we just get more of the butlers? That's better. However, it was short-lived, as after the Precure arrived, we went right into our fight of the week with Belze recapturing Wisdom, and annoyingly also getting his main target. Granted, he was more distracted by the Precure finding their secret HQ, but then revealed that they could just move the whole forest to another location if needed. Again, why do we not focus more on the interesting powers of these villains rather than... Shut up! I can't stand it anymore! Anyway, yeah, I guess we also need to resolve that gripping conflict between Pollun and Mepple by having the latter trying to save the kid by... If you tell him that, he's just gonna recapture Pollun, right? I mean, I guess he could lie to him, but I don't know what he would say that wouldn't get anyone else in danger. Not that it really mattered, as Shorty here thought the best way to make Meppo talk was by choking him. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, other than the butlers, this was a pretty badly written episode. I mean, the only thing that would be more ridiculous would be to have Pollun suddenly activate his powers here to rescue them and...
Why didn't he do that before? Ass.
Seriously, in previous episodes, he just sensed the Precure were in danger and sent them the powers, and yet here, they just had to needlessly milk the drama by having everyone cry and be sad after he was captured. Cheap moments like this don't make me feel bad for the characters, they just make me frustrated that the writers think this is a good way of drumming up sympathy rather than actually developing them. So, after one ugly knockoff DBZ fight sequence, Belze was forced to retreat along with his forest and wisdom in tow.
Well, that was pointless.
Okay, one more episode and I'm done with this part of the review. And thankfully, it was written by one of the more solid writers of this series so far, Daisuke Habara, who gave us stuff like the Imposter Cure episode, which got an almost immediate callback as said phonies held a vote to decide who'd play the titular roles for their rendition of Romeo and Juliet that their class were doing for the cultural festival. Not too surprisingly, this show's leads were voted in as the tragic couple. Hey, can someone tell that ship to quiet down? Shiho acted as the director, whilst the phonies were the costume designers. What, you don't want your crazy mom to know that you're making dresses behind her back? They were also given creative freedom to do what they wanted with the play, much to Shiho and her OG Cure Gorilla face. Meanwhile, we got a little follow-up to the last episode with the butler Zakenda facing judgment for almost letting their prisoner escape. Belze, who for whatever reason decided to brush his teeth here, seriously spit into a sink dude, decided to give them a pass because he recognized their worth. Do I even need to provide any more evidence why these two are the best? However, things weren't working as well for our protagonist, specifically Nagisa, and her inability to memorize her lines. Shiho wasn't exactly helping by taking a Stanley Kubrick approach to directing her actors. Best not to rush into that too much, girl. Eventually, the big day soon arrived, and I will say one of the best parts of this episode, aside from some of its really good comedy, was how everyone was supporting Nagisa through her role in some very wholesome moments. In particular, her partner managed to ad-lib around a lot of her flubs, leading to a good display of their camaraderie, which I think has been the biggest thing missing from this part of the series. Another great part of this episode came when Juna decided to crash the play. Also, yes, the animation here was easily leagues better than previous episodes, with Toshie Kawamura directing things and providing us with one of the rare untransformed fights for the series, making it all the more impressive when Nagisa managed to hold off the Zakenda. Damn, Lord Capulet is piling on with those gains. He ended up providing them with an opening to transform, but yeah, so like, did the audience assume that Nagisa and Honoka just quickly changed their costumes and ended up looking like those superheroines who at least have gained some notoriety in this town? Nah, whatever, this is still a really fun episode, even though the play itself had clearly lost the plot, as the audience had the most appropriate response to all of this.
I am so fucking ready.
And while not quite as good as their untransformed fight, they at least had a good exchange with Juna before you-know-who gave them their win condition. With that, they at least wrapped up the play nicely by rather cleverly reenacting the actual dramatic conflict they just went through, ending at least our coverage of this video with a really fun and entertaining little outing. So that was the third quarter of the OG Precure series, and boy was it rough. I mean, I do want to give them a little leeway, as I do keep saying, this series wasn't originally meant to go beyond its initial 26 episode order. That said, and while they did have some interesting new ideas and some pretty great episodes here and there, they couldn't exactly fully capitalize on them due to focusing on some other things that I'm not a huge fan of, to say the least. Look, I do get that kid characters, almost by their nature, are going to be at least a little grating. That alone isn't my major issue with Pollun. It has more to do with what the plot does, or rather doesn't do, because of his inclusion. The Darkseeds are actually rather fascinating characters, mostly because of their powers. I really like the concept of a mind leech who can worm their way into their victims' lives without them even realizing it. They even seem to warp reality to a degree, so there was a ton of creative possibilities they could have tackled when it came to these characters. And yet, they could really capitalize on it for at least two major reasons. One, they were likely writing a lot of these episodes from the seat of their pants. The concept of the Darkseeds likely originated from some early production material, so they just built off of that. Two, they had to push a new toy in Pollun to even justify them extending the season. As a result of these two factors, the series was kind of stuck in an endless pattern of needing to constantly push this mascot to the forefront, while often repeating the same plot after wisdom was captured as they were still working things out. From there, it quickly became monotonous, not helped by how this fairy was a very one-note, bratty character. Thus, in spite of some occasionally great animation and direction, this third core of the series was a bit of a wash, especially coming out of the first half of the series that had the freaking Kyria arc. We'll just have to see if they can pick themselves up by the end of this, and then go into... oh boy. But that will be for another day, and we might do a few side projects in between. I mean, I have like stacks of material I'm looking at right now. But until then, though, farewell for now, my friends, and yeah, you want to buy some earplugs with me? Come on.